Chapter 6. Where do we go from here? The problem with the state isn't a bad politician here or there. It's not just the Republicans. It's not just the Democrats. It's not limited to any party in any country. The problem is the state. It creates opportunities for plunder and abuse that are enormously attractive to anyone with the potential capacity to use it to exploit others. The people at the helm of the state will predictably tend to be bad people. Politicians and senior appointed officials aren't representative members of the population. Becoming a successful politician is a lot easier if you've got a particular character type. If you're ambitious, smooth, and willing to compromise your principles, or if you've conveniently forgotten to have any. The political process, any political process that gives people access to power, rewards bad behavior. A commitment to principle is likely to be far less influential on the behavior of elected and appointed office holders than the tendency to compromise, to seek power, and to be ambitious at all costs, to become part of the elite, or, if one is already a member, to consolidate one's position, to reward one's elite backers. It's probably not surprising that Jim Curry, a vice president of the National Association of Police Chiefs, has suggested that professional politicians exhibit many of the same characteristics as known psychopaths. While there are certainly idealistic state officials, the state primarily serves the political and financial elites who employ the political means of gaining wealth. The state provides the elite with an irreplaceable means of access to wealth and power. If current office holders are replaced by new ones, the power of the state will prove too tempting for many of them to resist. Good people who do find themselves in positions of power will be severely tempted to become not-so-good people. Almost every elected official needs the support of the wealthy and powerful to win an election. And once someone becomes elected, she or he becomes the target of intensive lobbying by special interests, who can always focus much more time, energy, and money on office holders than ordinary people can. Powerful interests can offer not only campaign contributions and outright bribes, but influence that makes them invaluable to politicians. Even when state officials actually want to make good decisions, they lack, any central authority would lack, the information needed to make those decisions, the information distributed throughout the entire population. State functionaries who have become emotionally invested in their positions and who do not wish to confront the cognitive dissonance that would be created if those positions were seen to be pointless will do their best to resist attempts to delegitimize the state or to argue that its power should be reduced. Momentum will continue to drive the state toward the acquisition of more and more power, and the media promote deference to military, intelligence, and police agencies and valorize authoritarian behavior and political power. At the national level, the imperial presidency grows with support from across the mainstream political spectrum. At all levels of government, there's growing confidence in unaccountable, expert managers. And state power tends to feed itself. Once an entity has power, it's not likely to surrender that power. Governments don't divest themselves of authority, they keep accumulating it. Elected officials and bureaucrats will almost always find it easier to retain power, even power they've argued shouldn't be exercised by bad guys, than to give it up. For instance, it was no surprise, sadly, when the Obama administration argued enthusiastically in favor of the state secrets privilege Democrats had sharply criticized the Bush administration for invoking. The problem isn't that this or that group of people is running the state. The problem is the state. The exercise of that kind of power is not only corrupting to those who use it, but also inherently frightening. The state claims to hold and seeks to exercise the power of life and death over people, the power to claim their possessions at will, to imprison them, to enslave them. The state is not accidentally, but essentially opposed to human freedom. And so people who seek human liberation have every reason to envision and incarnate real alternatives to the state. State actors can easily be corrupted by special interests. State power makes it easy for people to pursue their own agendas, often under the color of law, in ways that are very difficult for ordinary people to discover and challenge. Because the state has so much power, even well-intentioned errors can have awful consequences, and mischief coordinated among the elites who direct the course of state, mischief like war, can be devastating for entire societies. The state is dangerous. Attempts to reform and reorient the state don't hold much promise. Electing or appointing, how? More decent, honest, fair, compassionate people to office wouldn't eliminate the problems I've described here. The good news, though, is that ordinary people can craft and maintain effective ways of living together and solving human problems in the state's absence. I am convinced that life without the state will provide lots of opportunities for diverse cultural forms and ideological convictions to come to expression. And I suspect that the most effective ways to move beyond the state may involve practical experiments in doing without it right now. The shape of living statelessly. Anarchists often spend a lot of time imagining what life might be like without the state. I confess that I don't know. I don't have a plan, and if I did, I wouldn't want to impose it on everyone else. The good news, perhaps the best news, about anarchy is that there are more ways than you and I or anyone else can imagine to organize communities and solve problems. That's why I favor what is sometimes called panarchy, or anarchy without adjectives. A stateless society ought to be hospitable to primitivists and technophiles and transhumanists, proponents of markets and enthusiastic supporters of gift economies, atheists and fundamentalists, advocates of both individual and communal ownership, localists and cosmopolitans, decent voluntary communities and networks, and of course, just as is true today, decency won't be universal, will help people resolve disputes, protect people, especially vulnerable people and animals, against violence and injustice, insure people against risk, and help to safeguard them from the effects of economic insecurity. The state tends to crowd out alternatives, making people dependent by default on the services it provides. The stronger state power grows, the more a vigorous network of social service providers outside the state may tend to atrophy. However, there's a strong tradition of mutual aid that provides good evidence that people can take care of each other without the state's involvement. Of course, the fact that they can doesn't tell us how services will be delivered and supported, what priorities it makes sense to adopt, and how tasks will be allocated among the different overlapping communities, networks, and associations with which people are affiliated. The how will doubtless be different significantly from setting to setting. Different approaches will reflect the creative, experimental process of discovery and invention that anarchy will make possible. Kinds of communities. There will likely be all sorts of communities in a stateless society. No doubt, some of them will be geographic. It will be easier for people to manage some kinds of tasks by working together with people who live and work near where they do. A voluntary association of people operating a community hospital, for instance, will likely be made up, in general, of people who are geographically proximate. After all, moving patients and healthcare providers takes time and uses resources, and people presumably like to be able to take advantage of hospital care quickly and efficiently. Of course, there will be no state to insist that anyone living in a given geographic area join a particular community association or to enforce such an association's demand for tribute. And there won't be border guards and passport offices to keep people from moving from geographic region to geographic region, and so from being affiliated with different geographically based communities. At the same time, of course, many communities probably won't be geographically based. For instance, something like the ancient lex mercatoria might be expected to govern certain kinds of economic transactions. People interested in taking advantage of a consistent set of rules for such transactions might belong to virtual communities linked by the internet and built on interlocking trust networks that connected them with each other as they moved among and worked in diverse geographic regions. These voluntary virtual communities might well offer dispute resolution services grounded in principles widely shared among their members. Membership in such communities might make it easier for people to establish trust-based relationship with others. And members who exploited other members' trust would soon find themselves without the benefits of membership. People of all sorts who are willing to live peacefully to allow members of their own communities opportunities for exit and voice can contribute creatively to the ongoing process of experimentation and discovery that will enable a stateless society to flourish. Not all communities will work well. Some, indeed, may be dysfunctional and even destructive, and many will doubtless be committed to visions of the good life that are quite different from mine. That's okay. Who will decide what life looks like under anarchy? We will, all of us, through the innumerable decisions we make in communities, workplaces, associations, and spontaneous gatherings. In all of these cases, geographically localized and virtual alike. What will the plan, the system, the dominant norms look like? There won't be any. There will just be the diverse plans and systems and norms created and maintained by genuinely free people in a dizzying array of environments and following an unbelievable wealth of patterns. Anarchy as a discovery process. I've got fairly strong convictions about how I'd like to see things work without the state. Some of my convictions are moral. I think some things would be unjust and exploitative and subordinate and exclusive. Some of them are practical, empirical. I think authoritarian bureaucracies aren't very adept at managing the production and distribution of goods and services. I wouldn't hold these convictions if I didn't think they were plausible, but I recognize that I might be dead wrong about any number of them. Indeed, that's one reason I find anarchism appealing. Without a little cognitive humility, it's easy to assume that I've got a model, a plan, that's just right for everyone, that all I need is the right sort of benevolent philosopher queen to implement it. But of course, it's that kind of naive idealism about the capacities of states and the motivations of state actors that's gotten us into the mess we're in now, the mess in which the state tyrannizes us, supposedly for our own good. Embracing cognitive humility, recognizing that I might well be dead wrong, is a crucial reason not to support some kind of cookie-cutter standard to be imposed across the board on communities in a stateless society. Anarchy will give people the freedom to experiment, to figure out what works, to test ideas and ideologies, and figure out what happens when they're actually put into practice. Some options will work well. People will improve on and refine them. Others will likely be disastrous. People will abandon them with relief. And others will likely prove stable enough that people who are attached to them will preserve them and muddle through. The point is that only by trying them out will people really discover effectively just how much merit they really have. One advantageous feature of this kind of experimentation is that, if it goes badly wrong, the results can't be as catastrophic as they would be if a massive, powerful state apparatus messed things up dramatically. A large-scale coercive state can do far more harm than a voluntary small-scale virtual or geographic community. Varieties of stateless goodness. That doesn't mean that all options are equally okay, or that the notion that we can make sound judgments about what's right and wrong, good and bad, just goes out the window. Being an anarchist doesn't commit you to being a relativist or a nihilist. But there are all sorts of ways of being flourishingly human. Viable human life doesn't require that we all follow the same cultural patterns, endorse the same mores, inculcate the same folkways in the next generation. Some people, for instance, thrive in bustling, cosmopolitan environments, while others prefer the stability and familiarity of relatively self-contained communities. As long as no one in a given community is coerced into conforming, enslaved, prevented from leaving, as long as everyone is treated decently and respectfully, there's no good reason for anyone else to object to the existence or operation of that community. Individuals and networks in a stateless society can and should help others who are trying to escape slavery, flee abuse, or overthrow tyranny. They can and should challenge cultural patterns and communal institutions that oppress and exclude. But that won't mean that anarchist busybodies will spend their time trying to remake other people's communities so that they look like their own. Practically, people will lack the time, energy, and resources to engage in do-gooding campaigns at the drop of a hat. And mutual tolerance among members of different voluntary communities and networks, within limits, it may not always be efficient or required for people to actively intervene in unjust situations, but real injustice can never be treated as trivial, is obviously crucial to avoid constant conflict. Morally, respect for others' freedom and dignity will create a presumption, even if not an indefeasible one, against attempting to reshape their way of life. And the widespread shared benefits of leaving different groups of people free to explore different voluntary strategies for living well will give everyone a reason to let the process of discovery within multiple communities continue. The power of example. As a general rule, people learn most effectively not by being lectured to, but by seeing and experiencing for themselves. If I participate in the life of a particular community, I will benefit certainly from the ongoing discovery in that community of what works and what doesn't. But I also recognize that the success of my community will make it easier to share ideals that matter to me with others. Seeing those ideals on display, they will be more likely to acknowledge their value and to respect my community and the way it works. In turn, that also means that communities that, peaceably, voluntarily, explore ideals dramatically different from or diametrically opposed to mine do me and everyone else a favor. If they work, they challenge me to discover new human possibilities I'd been inclined to ignore. And they help me to remember that I am not at the center of the universe, that everything is not always as I perceive it, that things are not always as I expect them to be. They contribute to the ongoing process of liberating me from my preconceptions, from my unwillingness to be surprised. On the other hand, obviously, if they don't work, that helps too. They provide a clear demonstration that the kinds of ideals I care about make some sense, deserve some thoughtful consideration. They extend the conversation and deepen human understanding, even if they fail.